Large epidemics and pandemics occur on a regular basis throughout history, and it will occur again. It definitely will.
What happens to a city under siege from a deadly epidemic? Every epidemic has a patient zero. In 1885, he was a train conductor, coming into Montreal at the end of February from Chicago. Montreal, 1885. The city of some 200,000 is a tinderbox, waiting for a match. French and English, Catholic and Protestant, locked in an uneasy dance. By reputation, the city of wealth and death. Mansions spread out on the slope of the mountain, crowded slums below, and one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. On the night of February 28th, while well-to-do Montrealers are celebrating winter with skating parties and fireworks, a young doctor named Thomas Roger is summoned by the Grand Trunk Railway to see a patient. The patient is George Longley, a conductor who has fallen ill on the train from Chicago. Dr. Rogers' worst fears are confirmed. The conductor is infected with smallpox, the Red Death. The red spots of smallpox grow into blisters all over the body, killing 1 in 3, leaving survivors scarred, some blind, or crippled for life. Longley himself has only a mild case. In anyone he infects, the smallpox could turn fatal. Dr. Roger is vaccinated, but many in the city's poor neighborhoods, especially young children, are not.
The doctor's first inclination is he's English. Take him to the English hospital, Montreal General. The people there say, if he's got smallpox, he doesn't stay here because we can't put our patients at risk. There is a smallpox hospital. Why didn't you take him to the Montreal Smallpox Hospital? Well, the problem was that was a little old ramshackle building that had been set up during years when there was a lot of smallpox in the city, but it was closed because there hadn't been any in Montreal for 5 years. So what to do?
Alors, le docteur Rogers s'est en allé chez le docteur Hingston, William Hingston, qui était le chirurgien en chef à l'Hôtel-Dieu, parce que le docteur Hingston était irlandais, catholique. Les catholiques étaient admis à l'Hôtel-Dieu de Montréal et les protestants au Montréal général. Et c'était divisé sur une base de religion. Il était rendu 11h minuit le soir à sa maison. Et il discute avec le docteur Hingston, qui finalement accepte de signer un billet pour le faire admettre à l'Hôtel-Dieu.
Hingston will later deny knowing it is a case of smallpox. Dr. Roger assumes Hingston's note contains the diagnosis and says nothing to the nursing sisters at Hôtel-Dieu. As for the nuns on night duty, they take one look at Longley, assume it is chickenpox, and find him a bed.
In the build-up to great catastrophes, everything goes wrong. Small things as well as big things go wrong. You have little misunderstandings and chains of misunderstandings. And some things we'll never know the answer to. We don't know exactly what people thought that night.
Dr. Roger heads home to his own warm bed. George Longley is now Hotel Dieu's problem. The day after leaving George Longley at the Hotel Dieu, Dr. Roger returns to the contaminated railway car with an assistant, dragging out all the blankets and cushions, dousing them in coal oil, and setting them on fire, hoping to stop the deadly infection in its tracks.
There is a story of a nun coming in to see Longley the day after he was admitted, taking a look at him and exclaiming, "Oh, sir, you have smallpox. Why aren't you in the English hospital?" And he said, "They wouldn't have me." And she said, "Well, we're very glad to have you here." The sense of a duty to care.
The nuns quickly put Longley in isolation. After 3 weeks, he is released from the Hotel Dieu. He describes it as a poor place for pleasure, but middling good for relaxation, and heads back to Chicago on the next train. For a brief moment, it seems the spark of smallpox has been extinguished. March 23rd, 1885. 2 days after Longley is released, an Acadian servant girl working in the hospital comes down with a fever and breaks out in red spots. The nuns immediately place her in quarantine. On April 1st, Pélagie Robichaud dies, and her name, otherwise long forgotten, goes down in medical history. The first death of the 1885 epidemic. The gravediggers in Notre-Dame-des-Neiges cemetery light a fire to soften up the frozen ground. Pélagie's body is quickly placed in a double coffin to keep the disease from spreading, and buried without ceremony. 5 days after Pélagie dies, her sister Marie is diagnosed with hemorrhagic smallpox, the black pox, which spreads internally. The organs simply melt. Victims beg for death, and it comes quickly. The virus has begun to spread. So far, no word of smallpox has leaked out. Instead, Montreal's 9 newspapers report that the city is bracing for an outbreak of cholera when the ice melts. There is news of the local regiment, sent off to put down the rebellion in Western Canada led by Louis Riel. No word that the city's health committee ordered the smallpox hospital reopened, because the press were excluded from the debate.
It took an enterprising reporter from one of the newspapers, I think it was The Witness, to check the death returns and find out that this was happening. They thought they were going to contain the smallpox. Yes, a few people have died of smallpox. Okay, well, that happens, and we can control it. Sort of like C. difficile in hospitals today. Yeah, we're losing some people, but no need to be alarmed.
But the cover-up is doomed. New smallpox cases appear at Hotel Dieu day after day.
Even if there was a whispering of smallpox, we'd be all over it, there's no question. But how quickly would you get the information? I'm not sure. I think you'd get it pretty quickly. We knew about SARS almost as quickly as the medical authorities, because people talk.
Infectious disease outbreaks are different than bombs, than natural disasters. They last, and there is a sense that you can bring it home.
With smallpox, it's one of the biggest killers in history. It's often said smallpox killed more people than war, and there's no question it did. So that very fear is enough to do a lot of damage.
We have an emergency management plan, and if somebody were to say the word smallpox in our emergency room, once that was said, things would happen pretty fast.
Dr. Lincoln, neurology consultation. Dr. Portier. Dr. Iskander, psychiatry.
There would probably be a fair sense of panic within the staff. Patients that have been coming through the emergency in that surrounding area would have to be advised that they might have been exposed and they would have to isolate themselves. This at that point falls into the hands of the public health authorities.
The plan, smallpox, is essentially a worldwide emergency. It's not just a city or a province or a country. I mean, the minute anybody thinks that they have a smallpox case, everybody from the local public health to the provincial public health to the Canadian public health to the CDC to the World Health Organization suddenly becoming incredibly excited.
We'll be sending notifications very rapidly within the provinces to the hospital so that we can tell physicians smallpox has reappeared. Please look out for the following symptoms. And we may send them photographs of examples of what smallpox might look like. The main part of the national contingency plan for smallpox is a strategy that we call search and contain. So you need to know all the different contacts that the case may have, and public health will need to then chase up all of those contacts.
Well, it's easy on paper to say who's in charge. I think the plan looks pretty top-down. In reality, the local people are who really matter because they're going to be there. And in practice, I think, we saw this with SARS, that nobody was really in charge. We, in Canada, often become victims of our government arrangements. And that's unfortunate, and it would be tragic in a case of an infectious illness like this. I don't hold out a lot of faith that there would be somebody in charge quickly enough.
April 1885. In the days following the deaths of Pélagie and Marie, new cases continue to appear in the Hôtel Dieu's crowded wards. The hospital board decides all the patients will have to be sent home, and the hospital disinfected from bottom to top.
This turned out to be a really disastrous decision, because in sending home people from Hôtel Dieu who were contaminated with smallpox, you then move smallpox onto the streets of Montreal. Now it was abroad in the city.
On est à une époque, en 1885, où la médecine, évidemment, est beaucoup moins évoluée qu'aujourd'hui. Dans ce temps-là, on faisait appel à des miasmes. On appelait l'air vicié, on appelait ça miasme, et plusieurs maladies qui étaient transmissibles comme ça d'une personne à l'autre, on disait qu'elles étaient dues à des miasmes.
April 15th. The Health Committee admits publicly that there is an epidemic of smallpox in the city. Public vaccinators immediately go to work, vaccinating anyone for free. But there are only 2 of them, for a population near 200,000. Private doctors charge $1, a laborer's entire daily wage, to vaccinate just 1 child.
Vaccination by 1885 was a relatively tried and true procedure in which a little bit of cowpox virus was scratched onto the skin of a person, creating in them a small surface dose of cowpox, which created antibodies that gave protection against smallpox.
Mais il y a eu beaucoup de résistance. C'était la première fois dans l'histoire de la médecine qu'on prévenait une maladie en donnant une autre maladie. Alors ça faisait peur aux gens. Puis d'autant plus que cette autre maladie provenait d'un animal, en particulier la vache.
In the English community, the pressure to get vaccinated is hard to resist. Editorials in newspapers, even the clergy from their pulpits, urge vaccination. On the streets, people stop each other and compare vaccination scars. Not so in the French community. There, editorials dismiss the smallpox outbreak as English hysteria, and the priests in their pulpits are silent.
Worse than that, you begin to get really disturbing reports that people are saying there's something wrong with the vaccine, or the vaccine is causing sickness.
The rumors are true. The vaccine in use turns out to be contaminated. The English doctor in charge of supplying the vaccine is fired, but the damage is done. For opponents of vaccination, the bad vaccine is a golden opportunity.
Le médecin canadien-français qui s'est opposé le plus à la vaccination a été le docteur Émery Coder, qui était un professeur à la faculté. On dit, mais ça n'a pas été prouvé, on dit que 3 de ses enfants seraient morts à la suite de la vaccination. C'est plausible que ce soit la cause de son opposition au vaccin.
His ally in the English community is the so-called Dr. Alexander Milton Ross. His medical training is in the radical field of hydrotherapy. Drink only water, eat no meat, stay away from tobacco and whiskey, and renounce masturbation. Though his medical training is shaky, as a propagandist, A.M. Ross has few equals. In a letter published in the Herald, Ross calls vaccination
the direct means of poisoning the lifeblood of our race with foul and dangerous diseases. Diseases peculiar to cattle. I believe vaccination to be a monstrous fallacy and vulgar error unworthy of the intelligence of the 19th century.
After long and angry debate, on May 11th, the Health Committee backs down and suspends public vaccination. Like releasing the infected patients from Hotel Dieu, it is another terrible decision, guaranteeing the smallpox will spread.
There was always this notion that somebody brought it in. During the plague in Europe, it was the Jewish community that was hit. In HIV, it was the Haitian and the gay community, which inappropriately were stigmatized and targeted. During SARS, it was the Asian community. The stigmatization of groups targeted as causal in bringing in has not changed. The groups always tended to be not the rich and powerful of the society. Historically, they tended to be the immigrants, the people that came from the outside.
But that's existed throughout history. We've always had you know, the person who's identified with starting an epidemic, whether it's smallpox in Montreal or SARS in Toronto, there's always a name, or the cow who kicked over the lamp in Chicago and burned down the city. There's always a scapegoat, and that's almost inevitable, I think.
Blaming the immigrants is an old story. And in 1885, the newcomers are largely French-Canadian, migrating to the city of Montreal from the countryside in search of a better life, working in the mostly English-owned factories.
There are political issues in Canada that have been dividing English and French for generations. And now you've got a disease issue that cuts right through the central fault line. And of course, bigotry generates bigotry. And expressions of that bigotry start seeping into the newspapers.
Du côté francophone, c'était la Minerve qui s'opposait à la vaccination et qui appelait d'ailleurs la variole le mal des Anglais, qui est venu par un Américain de langue anglaise. Et chez les anglophones, le journal le plus violent a été le Herald contre les Canadiens français. Le Herald est tombé tout de suite dans le racisme.
An anonymous writer offers his own radical solution to the smallpox problem.
Let English capitalists, manufacturers and employers of labour drop off all the French help. Have only English-speaking people who are vaccinated and who are not afraid to use soap and water. And it will soon be seen how that will stir up action.
Il y a eu beaucoup de réponses à cette lettre-là, en lui disant que le journal n'aurait pas dû publier cette lettre, qui était une lettre raciste.
The response was to be properly outraged. That's not true, but of course, it's French Canadians who are dying of smallpox. Most of the victims, unvaccinated children, mostly in the poor quarters of the East End.
By the middle of May, some 25 have died, and another 50 have been infected. And then, something happens. As the annual floodwaters recede, the number of new cases starts to decline. On June 1st, there are only a dozen patients in the smallpox hospital, and no new cases at all.
In Montreal in the summer of 1885, there are always religious processions going on. Montreal soldiers have gone off to fight the rebellion in Western Canada, and now they come home, and you have a parade to welcome your soldiers. The big event in the summer of 1885 was when Buffalo Bill appeared with his Wild West show. Everybody has to go to see that. You can imagine the little children pleading with their mothers, "Oh, my spots are just about gone." Every one of these gatherings becomes a kind of cauldron for the fires of smallpox to spread a little bit further.
Anyone who can leaves the city. So it is in the summer of 1885. An exodus as the rich close up their mansions, leaving the servants to stand guard, and head up the river to their cottages or to fashionable summer resorts. In the working-class areas of the city, there is no escape from the growing number of sick and dying.
You wanted to bury smallpox cases as fast as possible, get them into bags and coffins, and get them into the earth. They were highly contagious. Families want to mourn their dead. Families want to have proper burials of their dead. They're not allowed to do this.
Throughout the blazing hot days of summer, the black smallpox van becomes a familiar sight, trundling up and down the streets of the East End. Saint-Dominique, Saint-Laurent, Wolfe, Montcalm, Visitation. Come to take away the sick, mostly children, to the overcrowded smallpox hospital. By mid-July, the number of dead is close to 200, with another 400 infected. And the epidemic is only just beginning to gather momentum. August 1885. With the death toll in the hundreds, the city's health authorities ask the Grey Nuns and Sisters of Providence to begin door-to-door visits in the worst-hit areas of the city. They fan out from their convents, offering whatever assistance they can, food, clothing, and the small sums of money the city has authorized them to distribute, with strict orders not to give any to families that include drinkers. The nuns record what they find.
11 personnes contaminées dans la même maison. Le père, un peu plus solide. 11 infected in the same house. The father, a bit stronger, struggles to take care of the others.
2 infants dead. A boy of 19 dying, ruined and half dead for days.
Every day, and some days twice, we have been visiting to bring help. The young man dies, his body falling in pieces.
We scrubbed and washed from top to bottom, killing many of the rats who were everywhere. Washing the poor victims every day. 85 Viger Street, Sarah Hainaut, age 33, and Alexis Frappier, age 41. Married 15 years. They have 7 children.
At the beginning of September, Albertine, age 10, dies, followed shortly by the oldest child, Joseph Albert, age 12. Only 2 survive. Berthe, age 10, and Arthur Alexis, 6.
In the blazing days and stifling nights this summer, tenement rooms are like ovens. People take to their balconies for relief. Tempers snap. Many in the city's working-class neighborhoods work from home, taking in laundry, or sewing, or baking, or live above a store. The placards warning customers away mean disaster. Attempts by the health police to quarantine infected houses is met with fierce resistance.
Containment only works if people are willing to be contained. Now, how are you going to stop the smallpox from spreading?
The toll continues to rise. Some 500 dead in the month of August alone. Rumors start to spread about the conditions inside the smallpox hospital.
As you began filling it with cases, it became a ghastly hellhole. Understaffed, no significant treatments. The kinds of personnel who would do this job were some of the dregs of the healthcare community. And so the smallpox hospital became a fearsome place.
A reporter for the Montreal Herald tracks down 16 former patients and records their testimony.
You awaken at night at the hospital to hear the noises of smallpox. The thump of a patient writhing in pain and fever and delirium who falls out of bed. Mugs clang on metal bed frames.
Water for God's sake. Give me some water.
You get up if you can and get some water from the pail for your fellow patient.
Close the window. I'm cold.
It rains, and the rains come through the open window. You shiver under your blanket, the wool fibers running into your pustules. When they close the windows, the stench is unbearable. If you're brought into the hospital at night, the attendant will motion you to go and find a bed somewhere. It may just be emptied by death, the linen unchanged. There appears to be no remedy, no relief for the victims of the black pox, many of whom are children. The victims moan and cry out, die with no one at their side, not even a priest, and are carried off and jammed into coffins. Some say that 2 or 3 bodies are sometimes put in the same coffin. If the cries are coming from the bad, or the black ward, where they keep the worst cases, you're too frightened to do anything. Maybe an attendant will come. They're often too busy for that ward. If the inmates stagger to the door or come out, the other patients run away. Cries from the heart of darkness fade to hoarse whispers. Eventually, they stop.
People's resistance to being vaccinated, I have to tell you, is one of the mysteries of human psychology, at least as far as I'm concerned. Vaccination is probably the single greatest medical achievement in all of medical history. Forget about all our drugs and antibiotics and operations and all these things. There's nothing that's had more of an impact on the general health of the world than vaccination. So, to me anyway, that is absolutely clear. It's not even worth debating.
By the end of the summer of 1885, the world was starting to realize there's something seriously wrong in Montreal. There were just too many stories coming out of the city about smallpox. The climate of fear of smallpox began to envelop all of North America, and Montreal was the place that you feared.
The boycotting of Montreal begins. Hotels are silent as tourists go elsewhere and conventions are cancelled.
Montréal, à ce moment-là, était... il y avait des industries. On fabriquait beaucoup de souliers. Les cigares de Montréal étaient les plus réputés. Et on voyait les affaires baisser parce que les gens avaient peur d'acheter des souliers fabriqués à Montréal et également de fumer des cigares venant de Montréal. Donc, les affaires périclitaient.
Basic goods are in short supply, as freight workers, long-distance truckers, and ship crews are reluctant to risk stopping in Montreal. Factories close. Stores are boarded up. Workers are laid off. For thousands of unemployed in the city, starvation is not far away.
And we think it can't happen, but it has happened. And when the SARS virus struck Toronto, the sense of déjà vu was absolutely stunning. We were seeing attitudes and concerns spring up again that echoed 19th century responses to epidemics in the most eerie kind of way. We were seeing the rest of the world beginning to boycott Toronto because of SARS, just as Montreal had been boycotted in 1885. We were seeing public health authorities teetering on the edge of a breakdown as they tried to enforce isolation on people. We were also seeing fear of germs, a fear of poison, viruses, on such a scale that you were beginning to wonder where rationality could be found. In September and October of 1885, the veneer of civilization begins to crumble. You've got now hundreds of people dying of smallpox a week in Montreal.
Le bureau de santé était convaincu que seule la vaccination pouvait empêcher la variole de s'étendre. Donc, on a proposé la vaccination obligatoire.
Though all the powerful voices, including the Catholic Church, are calling for compulsory vaccination, many in the streets are prepared to resist.
September 28th. Angry crowds assemble in front of the health office on St. Catherine Street. Speeches are made. The crowd applauds and jeers at the authorities. Someone casts the first stone. One of the health office windows shatters. Then the others. After half an hour, a cry goes up, "À l'Hôtel de Ville," to City Hall. The crowd, 1,000 strong, heads off down St. Catherine Street, stoning all front windows. Then masses in front of City Hall, shouting, "Down with compulsory vaccination!" All the police in the building are issued rifles with bayonets. The chief of police arrives at last, orders the rifles put away, and organizes sallies of club-wielding policemen who gradually drive off the angry crowd. By 1 in the morning, the rioters have fled, and the city is quiet again. About 2 o'clock, people living near City Hall report being awakened by sobbing and wailing from outside. A woman, dressed in rags, walks alone along the street, carrying an infant who is dying of smallpox. Mother and child have been turned out by the people at the house where they were staying. The onlookers hear the terrible story, turn out their lights, and go back to bed.
Dans les maisons, on ne pouvait pas isoler les enfants, je sais pas, 3, 4, 5 enfants qui avaient la variole, on ne pouvait pas les isoler. Et c'est pour ça que les autorités ont essayé d'aller chercher les enfants, presque de force, pour les amener à l'hôpital. Et les parents, souvent, s'opposaient à se séparer de leurs enfants, et on résistait. C'était une résistance violente. Et c'est là que se situe l'affaire Gagnon. La famille Gagnon avait quelques enfants, dont un grand adolescent, et les plus jeunes étaient atteints de la variole, et on a voulu aller les chercher. Le père a menacé les policiers de leur tirer dessus si ils amenaient les enfants. Alors, le maire Beaugrand a finalement ordonné aux policiers d'aller les chercher et les sortir morts ou vivants.
As the number of dead continues to rise, the city now has to face an awful new logistical question. What to do with all the bodies?
For now, let's say for Montreal, we believe close to 2,000 places. We can upgrade this for twice, but let's say, hope that we don't need to go there. But let's say that all the body has to be cremated. The problem is that we don't have enough machine cremator to do this. And even if they work 24 hours a day, it won't be suitable because those machines are not built to work as this.
The biggest problem, I think, in a pandemic, and our pandemic plan talks about this in Canada a lot, is what happens when the essential workers don't go to work. And I'm not talking about the doctors and nurses. I think they sort of have a code of ethics, and they're going to be there, most of them. But what happens when the Hydro-Quebec workers don't go to work and we don't have electricity? That's the real disaster that's going to happen, and we forget about those people. What happens when the guy who delivers the milk says, hey, I'm not going in my truck. I'm not going to die to deliver milk.
Well, the dilemma for the staff is very real. Are you going to come to work? If you come to work, are you going back to your family while this is going on? This is something that a lot of the staff in Toronto went through during the SARS epidemic, and these become very personal decisions by the staff.
there is a bit of a tendency for healthcare workers to feel somewhat invulnerable. However, I think SARS did change that. I think most of the healthcare workers that I know are fully aware that some healthcare workers got sick and some died from SARS, and that is bound to change the mentality of at least some people. And if smallpox were to come around, the number of people who are afraid to work, I think, would be higher.
The primary reason we are not prepared is because the key to preparedness is to have a robust healthcare system. And it's very difficult to imagine that if we have an influx of large number of cases, not small number of cases of anything can be handled, but a large number of cases where you're talking about thousands of ill individuals, we are not prepared because our emergency rooms are full. There is a healthcare manpower shortage. So it's not likely at this moment that we would be capable of handling it.
In the last days of 1885 in Montreal, most of the tumult and the shouting had died down, the rioting had stopped, and there was just a kind of grim street by street, house by house wrestling with the smallpox, stamping out burning ruins of fires, one house at a time.
Monday, November 16th. Louis Riel, convicted of treason, is sent to the gallows. Street demonstrations and protests erupt in Montreal. Riel, the speechmakers say, is one of our own. His death is our death. Thousands upon thousands of words for Riel. On the day of his execution, there are 20 reported deaths from smallpox. All but one, children. The youngest, 1 year and 1 month. The oldest, 9 years and 6 months. Riel gets all the attention. The children, none.
Diane Cadot, 1 year, 6 months. H. Charbonneau, 3 years. Marie Tessier, 1 year, 11 months. Oscar Sigouin, 1 year, 3 months. E. Menard, 3 years, 6 months. Amanda Leroux, 3 years, 3 months. Arthur Fréjot, 4 years. Marie Riel.
And as the month of the dead comes to an end, the bells toll on for those taken by the plague. Though no one will ever know the exact numbers, by the end of 1885, 20,000 or so have been stricken with smallpox, 1 out of every 10 in the city. Of those, close to 5,000 have died. 90% of the dead are French Catholics, the vast majority children under the age of 10.
I think public health, through immunization and other means, has reduced infectious disease to a level where it's become invisible until these more severe outbreaks occur. I think that infectious disease of various descriptions is very likely to keep coming and coming. So rather than just disease-specific plans, we have to have a sort of all-hazard infectious disease response as well.
I think we made pretty well all the mistakes we can make with an infectious disease with SARS, and hopefully we won't make them next time when it is really something serious.
I guess I have to be reminded from time to time how thin the veneer of civilization can be. The lessons of 1885 and the great age of infectious disease, we thought we had all learned by, say, the 1960s, and then we sort of forgot them. and they had to be relearned all over again, and we'd better be ready for it.
In the news today, health authorities in Toronto are reporting the first cases of an unidentified, highly contagious virus. No one knows how it arrived in the city and from where, but authorities there say there is no reason for alarm and the outbreak is under control.